Hi guys, it's Matt here from PilotPracticeExams.com, where you can pass in half the time. So let's get into how you plan a cross-country for an RAA's aircraft. So I like to use acronyms wherever possible, and the reason you should learn an acronym for this is because some flight instructors or examiners will launch it on you and say, hey, you can't use a checklist for this, you need to remember this. Okay, now they won't pass-fail you on that generally, but they want to see where you're at and they want to see what you've committed to memory and what you can do out of your head. And then they're obviously not going to let you take off unless you've got all the proper things in place. So the acronym I use is WCraft MNOP 3RAF. Okay, now the actual words are just WCraft MNOP, but 3RAF means when I get to the RAF section in craft, there's 3 for each. Okay, so in this video I'm going to deal with the bottom half. You can commit this section to memory so that you can memorize it, and this is the detail. So I'll just deal with the detail. So when you get to weather, what I want is I go into NAIPS, I find it far easier to use, but you can get this straight from the Air Services website. So I want the weather, the TAF, for each of the locations that I might fly into. I want the area forecast, and I want the SIGMETs. Now the SIGMETs are just significant meteorological events. In other words, if there's a big nasty storm cell moving through an area, it will be put down as a SIGMET, and generally they appear down the bottom of the area forecast. Okay, so when you're looking at the weather, obviously the main things that you want to check, you need to check lots of things, but the main things you want to check are clouds, wind, freezing level, turbulence, and times of predicted changes. Now the winds you're after for a few reasons. You're after, one, because your fuel calculations absolutely depend on your winds. Okay, if you've got a 20-knot headwind as opposed to a 20-knot tailwind, that's a huge difference in the amount of fuel. It's also a difference in the amount of time that you're up there, and it alters the heading, because if you've got a wind from your right, you need to alter your heading and track one way. If you've got a wind from the left, you need to do it the other way. So now the freezing level, let me talk about that. The freezing level, you really need to discuss this with your instructor, and it does depend sort of on the area you're flying in and the type of aircraft and a few other factors. But let me give it to you in a nutshell. Some people go, oh, you can't fly above the freezing level. Not true, okay? All airliners fly above the freezing level almost all of the time. You can fly above there in certain conditions if you stay away from cloud and moisture, and obviously some aircraft have de-icing and anti-icing, and you need to monitor it. But discuss that with your instructor. Well, I'm not telling you to do it. I'm saying yes, you can, with the right training and the right knowledge. Okay. The turbulence in certain circumstances. Turbulence, you want to have a look. Now, generally the turbulence is issued for a certain height and a certain level. So you've got mild turbulence, moderate turbulence, and severe turbulence. Now, severe you never want to fly a light aircraft in, ever. Moderate is going to be anywhere from mildly uncomfortable to very uncomfortable. Things moving in the plane, and sometimes bumping the whole way fairly severely. Now, and moderate should be okay. It's just going to be a bit bumpy. The other thing you want to check is changes. What time of change is forecast? Because if you're halfway through a long flight and the winds completely change, how is that going to affect your fuel consumption? Now, the CFG, you need to be taught by your instructor, and each aircraft has its own CFG calculations, and you need to work out where your centre of gravity lays within your envelope, and it does lay within the safe flight envelope. Runways, you need your numbers and your lengths. You want that for any airport that you're intending on going into, plus any diversions. Now, you can look them up in IRSA in flight, but you want to do as much pre-flight planning as you can. So the runway numbers and the lengths, you need the lengths so you can calculate your takeoff and landing distance, okay, and make sure that it's well within the limits of your aircraft for its current configuration. Radios, I do a plan on my dash, as I've shown some of you in videos before. I have it sequential for the flight, and I also have, excuse me, all of them listed in order, and then I have when I would need to change, and then any that I might only use for diversions or as backups, I have them listed down the bottom. So for example, let me just give you a quick example. Take off out of Port Macquarie, I might have to change onto, say, 3 lots of FIA frequency heading towards Dubbo, and then I would need Dubbo CTAF. So I would have those listed in order, and I would have listed when I actually need to change, you know, how many minutes or how many miles after a certain known position fix. Then I have rescue. Now here you need to consider what would you need in your aircraft if things went bad. So one of the good ones is flight following. You can ask air services to give you flight following, and they'll ask you to squawk a certain code, and they'll identify you, and then they will notify you if you deviate too far from your flight plan, or if you have oncoming traffic and other things. Now, it's helpful, but you can't just rely on it. Flight plan, you can submit that, and people will have a good idea to search where to search for if you don't arrive. You can use SAR time, which I haven't mentioned here. Have a look at that in URSA. And you can use a flight note. Now, a flight note is something that should be hanging in your local clubhouse or hangar. And if you take off, you leave one of those on the clipboard behind your plane or near the door or wherever they are kept in your hangar or your plane. Or you take a photo and email that to someone like your CFI or maybe your club captain or someone like that. Now, the other thing you need is your emergency equipment. So, you know, a bit of water, a first aid kit, and your emergency beacon if you're going more than 50 miles from your point of departure. Alternatives. Now here your alternatives depend on the weather. You always want to have alternatives, but in the case of inter and tempo for your destination, sometimes it's a requirement that you must have an alternative. So look that up in the AIPs and have a look whether you're required to have one or not. Now, the requirement for that will be based on the weather and the amount of cloud, the amount of rain, whether it's into or tempo, how long it is. So just check that out, make sure you're aware of that. The other thing is then you need your airspace, okay? So you're prohibited, you're restricted, and your danger areas. You want to know any of those en route, and you want to know roughly when they're going to occur. And some of them you may need to change altitudes for. So you need to be aware of those, and you need to check them the day you're going. A lot of the restricted airspace around the place is the NOTAMs for it only happen the day of flight. So often you'll plan the night before, you might have a bit of an idea where you're going to go, but you wake up in the morning and that airspace is actually active, so now you need to plan a route around it. So if you are pre-planning, it's often good to have, when you've got a lot of controlled airspace, or sorry, not controlled, when you've got a lot of restricted airspace, military, it's often best to plan 2 routes, one if you can go through it and one if you can go around it. Now the other thing is there, have a look, there are 3 categories, okay? So one of the categories you're allowed to plan through, another one you're not allowed to plan through at all, and another one you can plan through with permission. Okay, so but you still always need to check the activity. If you're uncertain when you get airborne, you call up Brisbane Centre and you give them the restricted airspace code, or you look it up on your NAPES. You can punch them in there and you can see whether they're active or not. But again, you won't be able to check until the day of flight. Now, then your altitudes. Now, your lowest safe altitude, sorry about all the coughing, I've got a bit of a cold. Lowest safe altitude, you must plan, even though you can fly 500 above terrain, you must plan 1,000 above terrain. And basically, the way you do that is you draw your line, and anything, the lowest hill or high ground that you cross on your flight, if it's within 1 thumb width of the line you draw, which equates to about 10 nautical miles, then you must go 1,000 feet above that. Then you must step it up to the correct hemispherical level, depending on whether you're heading east or west. So if you're heading east, it's going to be 1,500, 35, 55, 75, 95. If you're heading west, it's going to be your 2,500, 45, 65, or 85. However, be aware that in between those levels, the IFR traffic flies. So you don't want to go, say, thinking that, I can't really fly at, say, 3,500 here. I'll just go up to 4,000 because I don't want to go all the way up to 5,500. The problem with 4,000 is there's going to be IFR traffic at that height. So you do need to be aware of that. Now, Sometimes your airspace will affect altitude. So, for example, you might have a restricted airspace between where your takeoff and your destination, but it only goes up, say, from 0 to 5,000, surface to 5,000. So you might have to climb up and fly over it. Or it might be at high level and you've got to fly under it, such as the laneway near between Maitland and Gloucester. So then the next thing is fuel. Now your fuel calculations, you've got a fixed reserve and a variable reserve. Now your fixed reserve and your variable reserve, variable depends on the weather, and again it's going to come back to those inters and those tempos. Your fixed is a fixed percentage of your total fuel. Now I don't want to say it here because if CASA or RAAs change it, I don't want to be misquoted as being. Now your flight plan you download from the RAA's website or the air services, and your flight instructor will need to show you how to fill that out. I'm not even going to attempt that here, it's too complex. But basically fill that out, follow it, and you'll have all the details you need there. The fixes, you're required to have a position fix from map to ground every 30 minutes. Okay, so map out where they are. The best ones are where something crosses your flight path almost perpendicular. So if you fly directly across a railway line or a major road or a river, then that's a great position fix. Okay, if you fly along it, it can be much harder unless there's a very distinctive shape or bend or major kink or something else near it. So what you want to look for is things that you're either going to fly directly across, intersections of certain things, distinct shapes. Lakes are a brilliant landmark. Towns are a brilliant landmark. As you pass a beam, a certain town, a beam means when it's directly off your wingtip. So if I was flying, for example, say from Port Macquarie to Coffs Harbour, immediately when I was a beam Kempsey, or immediately when I was a beam any of those towns along the route, that would be a great landmark because they're going to be the most obvious ones to spot. Likewise, any major mountains or lakes. Towers on top of mountains are a great one. But when you get out west, when you're in a lot of featureless terrain, then they become much, much harder to spot. And out there, you definitely want to be looking for lakes and rivers. Often if the rivers are dry out there, they'll still have little shrubs and bushery and trees along the edge. But you do need to find some good landmarks, and sometimes you need to alter your flight plan to be able to find landmarks. Okay, there's a saying, I follow roads, rivers and railways. All right, and that's because once you get out west, it gets easy to get lost. So some people actually do follow those. Now, the other thing is, the next thing, takeoff and landing calculations. Now for these, you'll need your flight manual, okay, your operation manual out of your plane to tell you, and then you'll also need to calculate your density, altitude, and look to your performance charts. So for a lot of RAA's aircraft, they're not going to actually have a performance chart. They're just going to say minimum takeoff distance is X, okay? And you need to be a bit aware about how that's going to work, and you need to be very careful going into marginal runway length. So discuss that with your instructor. Also be very aware it's not always just the ground roll. If you go to somewhere like, say, Old Bar near Taree in New South Wales, it's got a surf club and trees at one end of the runway and high trees at the other. So, and it's a very short runway. So you do have to be very careful of that. Then the next thing you need is your maintenance release. Check that the maintenance release is in the aircraft. Make sure you've seen it. Make sure that it is current. Look for your NOTAMs. Check that the runways, look for cranes and other things like that. Displaced thresholds, flying foxes, bird migration, runway maintenance, vehicles on the runway, mowers, slashers, etc. Okay, I'll have them all mentioned in there. Operations. Now that's your pre-flight check. So check your aircraft carefully. When you're flying cross country, the risk of having an engine out is far more dangerous than when you're not, when you're flying locally. Because if you're flying locally, chances are people are going to miss you a lot quicker. You're going to be easier to find because you're probably flying near a built-up area. But with cross country, you could be anywhere, and the search area could be massive. So you do need to check your aircraft over very carefully, and you need to let people know where you're going, and you need to stick to where you're going. Okay, paperwork. Have you got your license? Have you got your medical? Okay, if you're required to have one. Are you medically fit? Okay, ask yourself that question. You know, should I be flying? Am I hungover? Am I on medicine? Am I tired? Am I stressed? Have I got anxiety or been through a fight? You know, have I just been sacked from work? If it's any of those things, not a good idea to be flying, okay? Your maintenance release, which we've said, that needs to be in the plane. Your C of G calcs, you need a copy of that in your plane. Your flight plan needs to be in there. You need a backup if you're using an electronic flight plan. So I don't like to rely on one device. So what I'll often do is have the flight plan on one device and photos of the flight plan and zoomed photos as well in sequential order on my other device, usually my phone or my smaller old iPad. Okay. And are you required to have in-date maps? If you're using an EFB, it's going to have one anyway. If you're using paper maps, they're required to be in-date and you must have them in the aircraft with you. Now, if you cover all of that, you're pretty much going to be covered, and that's going to get you out of trouble. It's going to make sure that you're compliant. I hope I haven't forgot anything here. If you have any questions, or if I did forget anything that you think is obvious, please drop it in the comments. Thanks for watching. It's Matt from Pilot Practice Exams, where you can pass your exams in half the time.